A brand new documentary has made its way into the Israeli Knesset. It's called I Am Israel, and it tells the story about the rebirth of the Jewish state through the eyes of the people who live there. Take a look.
I think I'm privileged to have grown up in a land where my grandfather, where his forefathers only dreamed of seeing built one day.
To me, Israel is the best proof God exists and still acting in our world.
It says, I will bring you in from the four corners of the earth, and people will know that you are my people and that I am your God.
God says, mountain, shoot forth your branches, give forth your fruit. My children are coming home. Every fruit you see is prophecy fulfilled.
Discover for yourself the miracle of the land and the courageous hearts of the people of Israel.
I am Israel.
This is home, and home is where you want to be.
Well, David Kiern is the producer. He's also the editor. He's also the writer. He's also the cinematographer for I Am Israel, and he's here now. And David, it's a pleasure having you.
Thank you, sir. It's a great pleasure to be here.
How did you get involved in this project? What was the motivation?
So, you know, I've been a filmmaker since I was a kid, since I was about 13 years old. And I grew up making films, doing things at church. But as a young adult, God really pressed on my heart to tell the stories about what he's doing all over the world and to tell the stories about the great people of faith. And I've done a few of these films all over the world, in India, and Mount Everest, and South Africa. And a few years ago, I was brought to Israel. Somebody brought me over there, my co-producer now, Lance McAlinden, because God said, Lance, go to Israel and take David Kiern with you. So I got to go, and it was an amazing experience, and it was a personal experience for me. Because I grew up in a Christian home, and I've been a believer since I was a little kid. A great Christian home, great family. But Israel was never really on my mind so much. I didn't really think about Israel so much. We had a soft spot in our heart for Israel and the Jewish people. But it wasn't something that we thought about so much. And when I went to Israel, it just blew me away. Because I got to see with my own eyes the promises of God coming into fruition just in our time. And that was really the genesis of I Am Israel.
Well, you really got into it when I was watching the film yesterday. You tell the story from the eyes of Israelis. You know, what motivated them, what was their inspiration both for making Aliyah, returning to Israel, and then living there. Why did you choose that as I guess, the sort of narrative for it? You're telling the story from their point of view.
Israel is just a place of miracles. And there's the miracle of the land, but there's also the miracle of the people. And that was one of the things I learned that I really didn't really understand until I went there. That for almost 2,000 years, the Jewish people had been scattered all over the world. And it's only in the last few generations that God has been bringing them back. And so it's really their story. The miracle of the regathering. And when we first went and interviewed a lot of these people to see what we could do a film about, they were all telling me a very similar story. We would meet so many people for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and ask questions. And they'd all want to talk about how they came to Israel, how they came, or their parents came, or their grandparents came. And they were all telling me the same story. And I realized about a week in that I've heard this story before. I've read this story before. Jeremiah talks about that God says there's going to come a time when you guys are not going to talk about Egypt so much. There's going to come a time where you're going to talk about how I brought you from the north and the south and the east and the west. And I realized maybe I'm actually seeing some of this stuff.
One of the things your film brings out, which I think a lot of people don't understand, is that it was actually the return of the people that started the rejuvenation of the land. You know, the promise that the desert would bloom, which, you know, you can literally see today in Israel. But the link of the return of the people is the key to why the desert is blooming.
It's incredible. That's another thing I learned when I was there, is that the Jewish hands and the Jewish feet have been the thing that's made the land come back. Because for almost 2,000 years, many nations came in and they tried to take over and they tried to farm, and it never worked. Until the Jewish people came back in the last few generations, it just didn't work. And now it's just the most beautiful thing. When I went there the first time and I saw how green it was, I realized I didn't know this. Just personally, I didn't know that this was a beautiful place. And maybe if I didn't know, maybe a lot of people have never seen that before.
Well, when you see the old photographs, I mean, any of the photographs from before 1900, any of the photographs even before 1948, you look at them and you go, that's a wasteland.
Right.
There's nothing there. And I mean, there are a couple people in the photographs, but there's no green fields. You don't see the lush that you see today. And
it's kind of neat we have those photographs, because it shows that God is on the move, and we can see proof that, no, in the 1800s, it was a mess. It was a desert. There's a line in the movie that Yaakov Berg, the vineyard owner, says, and he says, to me, Israel is the greatest proof that God exists and he's acting in our world. And that's his line. I didn't write that. That's his line. But it really is my worldview. I believe
tell us his story, because I think his story sort of summarizes, how the desert is reblooming.
It's interesting. Each character in the movie represents a theme of the rebirth of Israel. So we have the cowboy, who represents the protector of Israel. We have Alex Levine, the best painter in Israel. He represents the rebirth of art and culture. Yaakov, the vineyard owner, really represents the rebirth of the land. He was not, there had been no, the Bible talks about that in the mountains of Israel, the vineyards will come back. The vineyards will come back in the end times. And for almost 2,000 years, there was no vineyards in the mountains of Israel, in Samaria. And Yaakov was part of a group of men who were the very first people in 2,000 years to successfully plant vineyards in the mountains of Israel. And he's an amazing man.
He was actually told it's impossible. He had experts come in and say, what you're proposing, this land cannot support it. And he had to dig through rock in order to plant that.
Right. And they're now award-winning wines. I mean, it's some of the best wine that anybody will ever have.
One thing that was missing for me, what inspired him to dig through rock? I mean, if I have experts come to me and say, this is impossible, and I look out and I have to dig through rock in order to plant a vine, what got him to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that? I
think because it's in the Bible. It's an amazing thing. There's Yaakov and some of the vineyard owners that I know there in the mountains of Israel. It says it right here in the Bible. It says in Ezekiel that there's going to be vineyards here. So let's go. Let's do it. And they did it. And
the amazing thing is he invites Christians from all over the world to come and participate in the harvest.
That's right. Hayavel, which was the group that hosted me throughout this whole thing, they invite Christians from all over the world to come and be a part of the restoration of Israel, to pick the grapes, and to essentially to be servants in Israel. And Yaakov is a part of that. And so believers have a chance to actually get their hands dirty and be a part of the restoration.
All right. Well, I invite you to watch this. It's a wonderful DVD, and it's available for download for free to churches. So how can they get a copy of it?
So cbn.com. And there's DVDs and Blu-rays available, but it's also available. Any church in the world can download it and show it for free. And this year and all next year, too.
And it's a good time to do it because it's the 70th anniversary of the founding of Israel. And if our news story is accurate, we're going to be seeing the Embassy of America move. So if you want more information, all you have to do is go to cbn.com and get a copy of it. I Am Israel. I watched it. I was inspired. I know that if you watch it, you'll be inspired as well.